A steel dolly cart rolled across the porch and slammed into a stack of framed photographs, glass shattering across the wood in 100 pieces. Claire Whitfield dropped to her knees right there in the broken glass, clutching at a photo of her husband's face, begging the men to stop. But the agent standing over her only smiled. 3 weeks ago, her husband had died waiting for an insurance approval that never came. Now his company had sent this man to take her home too. And then, he made the ultimate mistake. He picked up Daniel's motorcycle vest from the pile of belongings, 40 years of patches earned as a Hells Angels road captain, and dropped it into a mud puddle. He pressed his shoe down on it slowly, watching her face while he did it, and laughed at her silent tears. He thought nothing could touch him, but what happens next will leave the entire country speechless. This is Heart Tales. Now, let us find out exactly what happened that day. Another agent reached into the pile of belongings scattered across the lawn and pulled out a framed wedding photo, Claire and Daniel laughing together on the happiest day of their lives, and hurled it against the side of the truck. The glass exploded on impact, and the wooden frame split clean down the middle, one half landing in the mud beside the ruined motorcycle vest. "Guess the biker gang husband can't save you now," the lead agent said, scraping mud off his boot with the edge of Claire's own porch rug. "Load the rest of it. We're done here." Claire did not scream. She did not beg again. She had already learned in the last 3 weeks that begging changed nothing. Not with doctors, not with claims adjusters, not with men like this one. She knelt down in the wreckage of her own front yard, gathered the broken photo with shaking hands, and pressed it against her chest, as if she could somehow hold the two people in it back together. Behind her, the agents kept working. A television was carried out and set down carelessly on the wet grass. A box of Daniel's old service medals tipped over, scattering ribbons and bronze across the mud. One agent laughed at something the other said, the sound carrying easily across the yard, completely indifferent to the woman kneeling 6 feet away from them. Claire's phone was still in her coat pocket, where it had been since the morning the hospital called to tell her Daniel was gone. She had not spoken to another human being in 9 days, except to sign paperwork. But her thumb found the contact without her even having to think about it. A name Daniel made her memorize years ago, back when he first patched into the club. "If anything ever happens to me," he had told her, only half joking, "and I mean anything, you call Walt before you call anybody else. Cops, lawyers, family. Walt first." She pressed call. The phone rang twice. "Whitfield residence. This better be important." Her voice cracked before she even got the first word out. "Walt, it's Claire." There was an immediate shift in his tone. "Claire, what's wrong?" "They're here," she said, watching another agent drag her television across the driveway, the cord dragging behind it and snapping loose from the wall. "The insurance company. They sent a crew to take the house. Walt, they took Daniel's vest, and they threw it in the mud, and one of them stepped on it. And he laughed. Walt, he laughed right in my face while he did it. And I didn't know who else to call." On the other end of the line, there was a silence so total that for a moment, Claire thought the call had dropped. Big Walt Dawson had spent 31 years riding beside Daniel Whitfield. He had stood beside him at 2 deployments, 1 wedding, and now 1 funeral. He was not a man who raised his voice easily, and he did not raise it now. If anything, his voice dropped lower, quieter, more controlled than Claire had ever heard it. "Where's the vest now?" "In the mud, by the driveway. They're still taking things out of the house." "Are they inside right now?" "Yes." "Is anyone touching you? Has anyone put their hands on you?" "No. Just the house. Just his things." Big Walt exhaled slowly, and Claire could hear something shift in the background on his end. A chair scraping back, a door opening. "Claire, listen to me very carefully. I want you to walk away from that house right now. Go stand by the mailbox at the end of your driveway and stay there. Don't argue with them. Don't touch anything. Just walk away and let me handle the rest." "Walt, I don't have money for a lawyer. You don't need a lawyer today," he said. "You need 30 minutes and a phone." Claire heard him say something to someone else in the room, his voice moving away from the phone for a moment. When he came back, His voice had changed again, quieter now, almost gentle. "Claire, I want you to hear this from me directly, because I know you're standing in the middle of the worst week of your life right now, and I need you to trust what I'm about to tell you. Daniel was my brother for 31 years, not blood. Something stronger than blood. And what happened to that vest today? That wasn't just an insult to you. That was an insult to every single one of us." Claire wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mud and tears together. "What are you going to do?" "Right now, nothing you'll be able to see," Big Walt said. "But by tomorrow night, I promise you, the whole country is going to know exactly what kind of company let your husband die, and exactly what kind of men they sent to spit on his memory afterward." The line went quiet for a moment. "Walt," Claire whispered, "what was Daniel really a part of? He never let me ask too many questions." Big Walt's answer came slow and heavy and absolutely certain. Something bigger than one company can survive. 800 motorcycles dropped their speed in perfect unison across both lanes of Cutter's Ridge Pass, the sound rolling down into a single unified growl that rattled windows a mile down the mountain. The Veterans Cemetery sat at the very base of the mountain, its gates opening onto the same narrow two-lane road that was the only route up to the resort. And the procession's scheduled noon burial meant 800 motorcycles and a hearse were about to occupy that single stretch of road for as long as the service required, entirely within their legal right to do so. Gordon Halloway was on the terrace of the Cutter's Ridge Grand Lodge, champagne glass in hand, when his junior assistant burst outside, phone pressed to her ear, her face drained of color. "Sir, you need to look at the road. I have a call with the SEC in 20 minutes. Then he looked down. The two-lane mountain road below him, the only route in or out of his $500 million resort, had vanished beneath a river of chrome and black leather, stretching backward around the mountain until it disappeared entirely from view. Behind that wall of motorcycles sat a line of black town cars and armored SUVs, carrying his board members, his investors, and 3 television crews, horns blaring uselessly into the thin mountain air. Gordon's glass slipped in his hand. "What in the hell is this?" "A funeral procession, sir," the assistant said. "For a man named Daniel Whitfield." The name meant nothing to him. He had signed off on thousands of denied claims over the years and had never once bothered to remember a single name attached to any of them. But every rider on that mountain remembered it perfectly. At the front, just behind the hearse, sat Walter Dawson, silver-bearded, a patch on his vest reading President. The men behind him simply called him Big Walt. Beside him, in the cab of a slow-moving truck, sat Claire Whitfield, dressed in black, a small wooden box resting in her lap. She did not look up at the resort towering above her. She already knew exactly what her presence there was about to do to the man inside it. Gordon's phone rang, his head of security. "Sir, they're not letting anyone through. They're moving at a walking pace, and the procession has the entire road." "Then call the police. Get them off my road." A pause. "Sir, I already called the sheriff's office. A legally permitted funeral procession has the right of way on a 2-lane road, and this one is scheduled to reach the Veterans Cemetery at exactly noon. Every rider is fully compliant with the posted procession speed. The sheriff told me directly he is not about to pull over 800 grieving bikers escorting a dead veteran to his burial on a public highway." Gordon's throat tightened. Through the clear mountain air, he could finally see the true scale of what had gathered at his gate. It was not 50 men. It was not 100. The front of the formation had already reached his resort, while the back of it was still climbing out of the valley floor far below. Every engine held to the exact same low, steady rumble as the formation reached the cemetery gates and settled into place for the noon service. They were not blocking the road out of spite. They were simply burying a man at the one location in the entire county where that happened to require the whole road. A cameraman from one of the news vans invited for the IPO celebration slowly turned his lens away from the champagne fountain and pointed it instead toward the mountain road, toward 800 motorcycles and a hearse that had just swallowed the only way in or out of Gordon Halloway's billion-dollar morning. His phone buzzed again, his chief financial officer, voice shaking. "Gordon, someone's live-streaming this. 40,000 viewers and climbing." At the very front of the crawling procession, Big Walt Dawson rode with one hand steady on the throttle, holding the formation to its exact, unhurried pace. Beside the hearse, in the cab of the slow-moving truck, Claire Whitfield sat with the wooden box held against her chest, the resort's tower of glass and marble rising above them as the whole procession inched past its gates. Gordon's security chief appeared at his side on the terrace, breathless. "Sir, what do you want me to do?" Gordon opened his mouth to answer, and found he had nothing to say. Below him, 1,000 feet down the mountainside, 800 motorcycles sat parked at the cemetery gates in perfect formation, engines idling low, riders standing beside their bikes in silence. Not shouting, not threatening, simply present, for exactly as long as a funeral takes, at the one place in the county where that happened to be directly in his way. A reporter's voice carried up faintly from below, narrating live into a phone camera. "And we are told this procession has been organized to escort the remains of Daniel Whitfield, a decorated veteran and longtime road captain, to his final resting place, following allegations that Meridian Health Assurance denied a life-saving medical claim that led to his death just 3 weeks ago." Gordon's chief financial officer was still talking in his ear. Something about the stock ticker, something about halted trading, but Gordon had stopped listening. He was staring down at Claire Whitfield, a small, still figure standing in black at the center of 800 silent men. And for the first time in his career, he understood, with a cold and sudden clarity, that money could not buy his way out of what was happening at the bottom of his own mountain. A red stamp came down hard on a claim form, the word "denied" printed across Daniel Whitfield's name, before a single doctor had even finished explaining his case to the review board. 3 weeks before that hearse ever reached Cutter's Ridge Pass, this was the moment that started everything, though nobody at Meridian Health Assurance thought of it as a moment at all. To them, it was file number 44719, one of 600 claims processed that single afternoon by an automated review system built to protect the company's quarterly earnings. Daniel Whitfield had been sick for 11 months by then. What began as fatigue and a persistent ache under his ribs turned out to be late-stage liver failure, the kind that comes without warning to a man who spent 30 years riding motorcycles across every state in the country and never once touched a drop of alcohol to explain it. His doctor, a quiet, exhausted man named Dr. Reyes, told Claire privately that a transplant was Daniel's only real chance, and that the window to get him one was closing fast. The transplant request went to Meridian for approval on a Tuesday morning. Claire remembered that detail specifically, because Daniel had joked, lying in his hospital bed with tubes taped to the back of his hand, that at least it wasn't a Monday, and Mondays were always unlucky. The system denied the claim in under 4 minutes. Claire did not understand at first that a machine had made the decision. She assumed a mistake had been made, a paperwork error, something a phone call could fix. She spent that entire Tuesday afternoon on hold, transferred 4 separate times, repeating Daniel's policy number to 4 separate representatives, who each told her something slightly different. One said the surgery was categorized as elective. One said additional documentation was required. One simply read from a script that said the claim had been reviewed and the decision was final. None of them told her the truth, because none of them actually knew it. The truth lived several floors above their call center, in a spreadsheet reviewed personally by Gordon Holloway's finance team, where a formula flagged any claim above a certain dollar threshold for automatic denial if the company's quarterly transplant budget projections were running high. Daniel Whitfield's transplant, priced at just over $400,000, sat comfortably above that line. Dr. Reyes appealed the decision himself. He wrote a 5-page letter explaining that without the transplant, his patient had, at most, a matter of weeks. The appeal was assigned a case number and placed into a queue. The average processing time for an appeal at Meridian Health Assurance was 21 business days. Daniel did not have 21 business days. Claire remembered sitting beside his hospital bed on the 9th night, holding his hand while a machine beeped steadily beside them, and Daniel, half asleep from the medication, squeezing her fingers and asking her not to worry so much. "I've been in worse spots than this," he told her, his voice thin but still carrying that same steady calm she had fallen in love with 22 years earlier. "Rode through a blizzard in Wyoming once, with a busted collarbone, to get a brother to a hospital on time. This is nothing. But it was not nothing. On the 11th night, his condition turned sharply. Claire called the nurse's station at 2 in the morning, then called again at 2:15, then stood in the hallway begging anyone in scrubs to tell her whether the appeal had been approved yet, whether there was still time, whether anything at all could be done. At 4:17 in the morning, the heart monitor in Daniel Whitfield's room flattened into one long, unbroken tone. Claire was holding his hand when it happened. She did not let go for almost an hour afterward, even after the doctors had gently stepped back, even after a nurse quietly pulled a sheet up and dimmed the lights. The appeal was formally closed out 3 days after Daniel's death. The case marked resolved since there was no longer a patient left to treat. Claire received the letter in the mail, printed on Meridian Health Assurance letterhead, thanking her for her patience during the review process and informing her that, unfortunately, the claim did not meet the necessary criteria for approval. At the bottom of the page was a phone number for questions, and beneath that, in smaller print, a single line that read, "We are committed to providing quality care you can trust." Claire folded the letter twice and placed it in the drawer of Daniel's nightstand, beside his reading glasses and the watch he never had the chance to wear again. She did not yet know the name Gordon Halloway. She did not yet know that the man who ran the company that let her husband die was, at that very moment, celebrating a record quarter with his board of directors, congratulating his finance team for keeping costs under projection, 3 quarters in a row. She only knew that the house had gone terribly quiet, and that in 3 weeks, men in gray uniforms would arrive at her front door to take that house away from her too. Big Walt Dawson slammed the clubhouse door shut behind him and picked up the heavy black telephone sitting on the bar before he had even finished crossing the room. 50 men were already gathered inside, standing in tense silence, most of them still in their riding jackets from getting the call 20 minutes earlier. Caleb, the youngest patched member in the chapter, stood near the front with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. "Walt, tell me what we're doing," Caleb said. "Because if it's what I think it is, I'm already halfway out that door." Big Walt held up one hand without looking at him, the phone already pressed to his ear, ringing. "We're not doing anything stupid," he said. "We're doing something permanent." The line picked up on the second ring, a gruff voice on the other end, half asleep. "This better be good, Walt. Frank, it's about Daniel." There was a pause, and then the voice on the other end changed entirely, sharpening into full attention. "What happened?" "He's gone. Died 3 weeks ago, waiting on an insurance company to approve a transplant they'd already decided never to pay for. Today, that same company sent a crew to take his widow's house, and one of their men spit on Daniel's vest and laughed while he did it." Silence stretched across the line for 3 long seconds. "How many men do you need?" Frank said. "Every rider who can make it to Idaho by Friday. You'll have Nevada's whole chapter on the road within the hour." The line went dead. Big Walt did not sit down. He dialed again, and again, and again. The numbers coming from memory built over 3 decades of riding beside these same men, through funerals, hospital visits, and highway breakdowns in the middle of nowhere. He called a chapter in Utah next, then one in Nevada, then Arizona, then Colorado, then finally a small chapter out in Montana that Daniel himself had helped establish nearly 15 years earlier. He did not have to explain local politics. He did not have to argue or convince anyone. Each time, he said only a version of the same sentence. A brother's widow had been humiliated by a company that let him die, and men had laughed while doing it. That was the only detail that mattered to any of them. By the 3rd call, Caleb had stopped pacing and started listening, arms still crossed but his eyes fixed on Big Walt's face. "Utah's in," Big Walt said, setting the phone down for a moment and looking around the room. "Nevada's in. Arizona's sending their whole chapter. Colorado too." "That's what, 4 states?" Caleb asked. "Montana makes 5. Big Walt picked the phone back up and dialed one final number. This one rang longer than the others, nearly 6 rings, before a woman's voice answered, tired but alert. "Dawson Residence. Sarah. It's Walt. Is Ray there?" There was a shuffling sound, and then a different voice came on the line, older, roughened by decades of gravel roads and long winters. "Walt, it's been a long time." "Too long, Ray. I need to ask you something. And I need you to say yes before you even hear the whole thing. Ray laughed once, low and tired. You already know I will. What is it? Big Walt told him. There was no laughter this time. We'll be there by Thursday night, Ray said, his voice suddenly hard as stone. Tell Claire she's not standing alone in this. Not for one more day. When Big Walt finally set the receiver down, the room had gone completely silent. 50 men standing shoulder to shoulder, waiting for him to speak. He looked around at each of their faces, one at a time, before he finally said the number out loud. Starting tonight, we've got brothers riding in from 5 different states. By Friday night, we'll have 800 riders converging right here in Idaho. A low murmur swept through the room, disbelief mixing with something closer to reverence. 800 men. It was no longer a single chapter defending one of their own. It was something far larger, something that stretched across state lines and decades of loyalty, all of it converging because of one man's memory and one widow's grief. But, hear me on this, Big Walt continued, raising a hand to silence the murmur before it could grow louder. Nobody brings a weapon. Nobody touches a drop of alcohol. We don't speed. We stop at every stop sign. We use our turn signals on every single turn. And if a police officer so much as looks at you sideways, you say yes, sir, and no, sir, and you keep moving. We are going to be the most law-abiding men this state has ever seen roll through it. Caleb frowned, some of his earlier fire cooling into confusion. Walt, if we're not riding in hot, then what exactly are we doing? Big Walt walked to the large map pinned to the clubhouse wall, a topographical map of the mountains surrounding Cutter's Ridge Pass, and tapped one thick finger against a single winding red line, marking the only road up to the resort. We're going to give Daniel the funeral procession he deserves, Big Walt said quietly. And it just so happens that procession is going to travel up the exact same road Gordon Holloway needs clear for his big celebration this Saturday morning. The genius of it settled slowly across the room, and one by one, the tension in 50 pairs of shoulders shifted into something else entirely. Not rage, something colder, steadier, and far more dangerous to a man like Gordon Holloway than rage could ever be. A laptop screen flipped open inside one of the stranded town cars, and a journalist named Patricia Cole began scrolling through a folder of leaked internal documents that had just landed in her inbox 30 seconds earlier, sent from an address she did not recognize, with a subject line that read simply, "You'll want to see this before you reach the summit." Patricia had been trapped in traffic for nearly 2 hours by then, same as every other guest invited to Gordon Holloway's IPO celebration, watching 800 motorcycles sit motionless in front of the resort gate through her tinted window. She had already filmed several minutes of footage for her network, mostly wide shots of the procession, and a few words with her producer about how strange it was that the sheriff's department seemed completely unwilling to intervene. She had not expected her actual story to fall directly into her lap. The document was a spreadsheet, internal, time-stamped, carrying Meridian Health Assurance's own letterhead in the header. Patricia scrolled slowly at first, then faster, her breath catching somewhere in her chest as the pattern became impossible to misread. Column after column listed denied medical claims, cross-referenced against a formula labeled quarterly threshold adjustment, a system that automatically flagged and rejected any claim above a certain dollar amount whenever the company's internal cost projections ran high for that quarter. Near the bottom of one tab, a single row caught her eye. Policyholder, Whitfield, Daniel R. claim type, liver transplant, urgent, status, denied, threshold exceeded, appeal processing time, standard queue, 21 business days. Patricia sat back hard against her seat. She immediately called her producer. I need you to look at something right now. Patricia, we're stuck in a funeral procession on the side of a mountain. Whatever it is, it can't wait. I think I just found out why 800 bikers are blocking this road. Up on the terrace, Gordon Holloway had no idea any of this was happening. He was still on the phone with his chief financial officer, trying to calculate how much longer the stock exchange could reasonably delay opening trading before the delay itself became a bigger story than the traffic jam below him. Just get the market to open on schedule, Gordon said, his voice tight. This is a temporary road blockage, nothing more. By this afternoon, nobody will remember it. His assistant appeared again at his side, phone in hand, her expression somehow even paler than before. "Sir, one of the reporters trapped down there just published something." "Published what?" She turned her phone toward him. On the screen, a breaking news alert scrolled across the bottom of a live broadcast. The same broadcast currently streaming to nearly 200,000 viewers. The chyron read, "Leaked documents suggest Meridian Health denied claims based on quarterly profit targets, not medical need." Gordon's hand tightened around his phone hard enough that his knuckles went white. "Get legal on the line," he said. "Right now." But it was already too late for legal to matter. Down at the base of the mountain, Big Walt Dawson had removed his sunglasses entirely, watching the same broadcast on a phone held up by one of his men. Beside him, Claire Whitfield stood with the small wooden box still pressed against her chest, watching the numbers on that live stream climb past 250,000 viewers, then 300,000, the comment section filling faster than anyone could read it. A local news chopper that had been circling overhead for the last hour banked sharply and dropped lower, its cameras no longer aimed at the motorcycles at all, but zoomed instead on the terrace above, on Gordon Holloway himself, phone pressed to his ear, pacing back and forth in front of his own champagne fountain. Inside one of the stranded vehicles further down the line, a man in an expensive gray suit lowered his own phone slowly. He was Richard Aldridge, the lead institutional investor behind nearly 40% of Meridian's upcoming public offering, and he had just finished reading the same leaked spreadsheet as everyone else. He dialed Gordon directly. "Gordon," Aldridge said, his voice flat and cold in a way it had never been before in 11 years of partnership. "Tell me the document currently circulating on every major news network is fabricated." Gordon hesitated, just half a second too long. "Richard, I can explain the context of that spreadsheet. It's not as simple as—" "That's not a no," Aldridge said quietly. "It's a formula, Richard. Every insurance company uses cost modeling. This isn't— You let a war veteran die so your numbers would look good for exactly this morning," Aldridge said. "And I am currently sitting in a car with 3 news vans behind me, watching this story break in real time. Gordon, I am pulling my firm's entire position out of this offering before markets open. Effective immediately." The call disconnected before Gordon could respond. Gordon stood frozen on the terrace, his phone slowly lowering from his ear, the champagne fountain still bubbling cheerfully behind him, utterly indifferent to the fact that the empire it was meant to celebrate had just begun collapsing in full view of the entire country. Below him, at the gate, Big Walt Dawson finally allowed himself the faintest trace of a smile. Not from satisfaction, from something closer to relief. "He's not going to need us to raise a single hand," Big Walt said quietly to Claire. "The truth's already doing that for us." A red arrow appeared on the trading screen inside Meridian Health Assurance's New York headquarters, and within 4 minutes it had dropped the company's pre-market stock price down 18%, a number that kept falling every time someone refreshed the page. Analysts who had spent the entire previous week writing glowing projections about the company's public offering were now scrambling to issue corrections, most of them citing the same 3 words that had exploded across every financial news outlet within the hour: quarterly profit denial. Inside a glass conference room 40 floors above Manhattan, 7 members of Meridian's board of directors sat around a long table, a speakerphone placed at its center. Gordon Holloway's voice coming through it, thin and distorted from the mountain resort out west. "I am asking all of you to remain calm," Gordon said. "This is a public relations problem, and public relations problems can be managed." The board's chairwoman, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Eleanor Voss, exchanged a glance with the men seated on either side of her before responding. "Gordon, our stock has lost nearly $2 billion in market value in the last 40 minutes. Richard Aldridge has already withdrawn his firm's entire position. 3 other institutional investors followed within minutes of him. This is not a public relations problem. This is a company-ending event, and it is happening in real time on every major news network in the country." "The claims formula was a cost modeling tool," Gordon said, his voice rising slightly. "Every insurance company in America uses similar systems. This is standard industry practice, and I am not going to apologize for running a financially responsible—" "Gordon," Eleanor's voice cut through his sentence like a blade. There is currently a helicopter shot of you on National Frontline News, standing on a terrace in front of a champagne fountain, while a widow stands at the bottom of your mountain holding her husband's ashes. I do not need you to explain cost modeling to me. I need you to stop talking." Silence settled over the speakerphone. Eleanor continued, quieter now, and somehow more final because of it. "The board is calling an emergency vote, effective immediately." "On what basis?" Gordon said, though everyone in that room, including Gordon himself, already knew exactly what the vote would be. "On the basis that our chief executive officer personally approved a formula that denied a dying man's transplant to protect a quarterly earnings target, then sent a collections crew to seize his widow's home while she was still grieving. On the basis that you have turned a public health insurance company into a national symbol of everything wrong with this industry, on the single most visible morning of its corporate history." One by one, hands rose around the conference table. Eleanor did not need to count them twice. "The board votes unanimously to remove Gordon Holloway as Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Health Assurance, effective immediately," she said. "Gordon, security will need your resort credentials and company phone before you leave the property today." The line stayed connected for a few more seconds, filled only with the distant sound of a champagne fountain still bubbling somewhere behind Gordon Holloway, before the call finally disconnected on its own. Back on the terrace, Gordon lowered the phone from his ear slowly, his hand trembling slightly, though whether from rage or shock even he could not have said for certain. Around him, the celebration he had spent 2 years building toward had completely dissolved. Waiters stood frozen near untouched trays of food. Investors who had not yet fled to their cars stood in small, hushed clusters, phones pressed to their ears, already distancing themselves from a man who, 10 minutes earlier, they had been eager to shake hands with. His head of security approached carefully. "Sir, I need to ask for your resort access badge." Gordon stared at him for a long moment, before slowly unclipping the badge from his jacket and placing it into the man's outstretched hand. It was, in some strange way, the very first order he had followed all morning without arguing. Down at the base of the mountain, the news of the board's vote reached the crowd of stranded reporters within minutes, spreading through their group in a wave of shifting camera angles and updated broadcasts. Patricia Cole stood at the front of her own crew now, delivering the update live, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Just moments ago, Meridian Health Assurance's board of directors voted to remove Chief Executive Officer Gordon Holloway following the release of internal documents suggesting the company denied a life-saving medical claim in order to protect its quarterly financial targets. That claim belonged to Daniel Whitfield, the very man whose funeral procession currently blocks the road behind me. At the gate, Big Walt Dawson listened to the broadcast without any visible reaction at all, his arms still crossed, his eyes still fixed on the resort above. Beside him, Claire Whitfield finally allowed herself to breathe out slowly, the wooden box still held tightly against her chest. "It's not over," Big Walt said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Not until he walks down here and looks you in the eye." As if summoned by the words themselves, a lone figure appeared at the top of the long driveway leading down from the resort, moving slowly on foot. No security detail beside him, no assistant trailing behind. Just a man in an expensive suit, beginning the long walk down toward the gate, where 800 silent riders and one grieving widow stood waiting for him. Gordon Holloway's leather shoes hit the gravel driveway one slow step at a time, each one carrying him further from the resort that no longer belonged to him, and closer to the wall of 800 men waiting silently at the bottom of the hill. He had walked plenty of red carpets in his career, plenty of stages, plenty of boardrooms. He had never once, in 53 years of life, walked anywhere that felt like this. Halfway down, his phone buzzed one final time. A text message from an unknown number, though the message itself made it clear exactly who had sent it. "We are watching the same broadcast as you, Gordon. So is the rest of the country." He put the phone away and did not check it again. By the time he reached the gate, the entire mountain had gone eerily quiet. 800 engines sat silent. News helicopters hovered high enough now that their blades were only a distant hum. Every camera pointed at the resort turned instead toward the single man walking the last few yards on foot. his expensive suit rumpled, his face pale under the mountain sun. Big Walt Dawson did not move from his position in front of the hearse. He simply watched Gordon approach, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Claire Whitfield stood a few feet away, the small wooden box still held against her chest. And for the first time since the repossession crew had arrived at her home 3 weeks earlier, she did not look afraid. She looked exactly like a woman who had already survived the worst thing that could happen to her, and had nothing left to fear from the man standing in front of her now. Gordon stopped 5 feet away, his mouth opening and then closing again, as though the words he had planned during that long walk down the hill had abandoned him entirely the moment he needed them. "Mrs. Whitfield," he finally managed. "I want to say that say his name," Claire said quietly. Her voice did not shake. Gordon blinked. "I'm sorry? You've called me Mrs. Whitfield twice now. You've never once said his name. Not when your company denied his claim. Not when your crew threw his vest in the mud. Say his name." For a long moment, Gordon simply stood there, the weight of 800 silent stares pressing down on him harder than any words could have. Somewhere behind him, faintly, he could hear his own name being repeated across 3 different news broadcasts, each one attaching itself permanently to a story he would never be able to outrun for the rest of his life. "Daniel," Gordon said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel Whitfield." "He served this country for 6 years, Claire said. "He rode with these men for 30. He spent the last night of his life asking me not to worry, because he'd survived worse than a hospital bed. And he was wrong, because the thing that actually killed him wasn't in that hospital room. It was a formula sitting on a spreadsheet on your desk." Gordon's jaw tightened, something in him still searching for a defense even now, some fragment of the explanation he had rehearsed 100 times in boardrooms. But standing there, in front of 800 men who had ridden across 5 states out of loyalty to a single memory, the words simply would not come. "I didn't know his name," Gordon admitted quietly. "I want you to understand that. I never looked at the names. I only looked at the numbers." "That," Big Walt said, speaking for the first time, his voice low and steady, "is exactly the problem, son." Gordon turned to face him. "You built a company that makes life and death decisions for a living," Big Walt continued, "and somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that the people attached to those decisions weren't real enough to matter. Daniel mattered. Claire matters. And there are probably thousands of other names sitting in that same spreadsheet who matter just as much, and never got 800 men to come stand up for them." Gordon's eyes moved slowly across the formation stretching behind Big Walt. Hundreds of men standing in complete silence, none of them shouting, none of them threatening, simply present, simply immovable. A wall built entirely out of loyalty and grief. For the first time since the crisis began that morning, Gordon Holloway understood that this had never truly been about blocking a road. It had been about proving, in the most undeniable way possible, that the people his company treated as numbers were in fact deeply and permanently loved by someone. "I am sorry," Gordon said finally, and this time the words carried something different in them, something closer to actual weight. "I am sorry for what happened to Daniel. I am sorry for what my company did to you afterward. There is no version of an apology that fixes either of those things, and I understand that." Claire studied him for a long moment before finally speaking again. "No, there isn't. But you can still do one thing that matters." "What's that?" "Fix the formula. Not for me. For the next family standing where I was, 3 weeks ago." 3 months later, Meridian Health Assurance operated under entirely new leadership, its automated claims system suspended, pending a full federal review after regulators opened an investigation into the exact spreadsheet that had ended Gordon Holloway's career. The company's new board publicly announced sweeping reforms to its appeals process, guaranteeing urgent medical claims a review within 48 hours, rather than the previous 3-week standard. They also established a fund covering emergency medical appeals for military veterans and their families, named, at the insistence of several board members who had watched the Mountain broadcast live, the Daniel Whitfield Fund. Claire Whitfield still lived in the same house, her home no longer at risk. The paperwork quietly resolved once national attention made Meridian's legal team suddenly very eager to settle. On the anniversary of Daniel's passing, She rode on the back of Big Walt Dawson's motorcycle to the veterans cemetery outside Silver Creek, where her husband's motorcycle vest, cleaned and carefully restored, now hung framed on the wall of the local clubhouse, a reminder to every new member of exactly what the patch on their back was supposed to mean. Gordon Halloway never returned to the insurance industry. Years later, in a rare public interview, he was asked what he had learned from the collapse of his career on that mountain. "I learned that behind every number on a spreadsheet is somebody's whole world," he said, "and that no amount of money is worth forgetting that." This has been another story from Heart Tales. If this story moved you, if you believe that no company, no matter how powerful, should ever be allowed to treat a human life like a line item, then like this video, subscribe for more stories like it, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were standing in Claire's shoes?